multiverse is a tapestry of infinite realities, each governed by its own immutable laws. In one universe, a man without powers became the most dangerous creature in a world full of gods. He did it through will, through pain, through the absolute refusal to let the darkness that took everything from him take anything else. But will means nothing to the laws of physics when they decide to rewrite themselves. And tonight, in a Wayne Enterprises sub-basement research facility, the laws of physics had an opinion. The dimensional rift lasted exactly 4 seconds. That was enough. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. Batman's first awareness was the sound. A deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor plating beneath his boots. Mechanical and vast, like standing inside the chest cavity of something planetary. His second awareness was gravity. Normal, Earth standard. That narrowed things considerably. His third awareness was the smell. Recycled air, treated with chemical scrubbers, faintly metallic, carrying the ghost of burned ozone and hydraulic fluid. Military, industrial, enclosed. He was inside something enormous. He had been mid-grapple across the Gotham financial district when the rift swallowed him. One moment, the rain, the gargoyles, the familiar weight of his city pressing against his shoulders. The next, a white nothing that lasted long enough for him to begin cataloging what he didn't know, which was everything. He'd landed in a crouch on gray floor plating, instinct absorbing the impact before his mind fully caught up. 10 years of training that turned the body into a separate, smarter animal. The body had already assessed the room while his mind was still catching its bearings. Corridor, 8 meters wide, 12 meters tall, white-gray paneling with black trim, lit by harsh strip lighting that cast no shadows worth mentioning. Blast doors at both ends, sealed. 2 security cameras. He'd already identified their sweep arcs by the time he registered seeing them. Blinking red. He pressed himself against the wall and pulled his cape across his body, the nanofiber shifting to match the matte gray surface behind him with approximate camouflage. Not perfect. Good enough for 2 seconds. 2 seconds was what he needed. The cameras swept left. He moved right, low and fast, reaching the junction of wall and blast door in 4 steps that made no sound. He examined the door mechanism. Not magnetic. Pneumatic hydraulic hybrid with an electronic override panel. Different from anything in his database, but not different from the underlying logic of what a door was supposed to do. He pulled a microtransmitter from his belt, a device designed for cracking Gotham's electronic locks, and pressed it to the panel. It wouldn't work perfectly. It didn't need to. It needed to work enough. The door hissed open 3 inches before the system registered an unauthorized signal and began to close. He was already through. The corridor beyond was longer, and it was not empty. 2 soldiers stood at a T-junction 40 meters ahead, their backs partially turned, their armor white and rounded, the kind of design philosophy that prioritized intimidation and uniformity over ergonomics. They carried rifles he didn't recognize, energy-based from the power cells visible at the magazines, not chemically propelled. Different physics to account for. He filed it. He was already moving along the ceiling via the grapple line anchored to a ventilation housing overhead, body flat, watching them from 12 meters above their eye line. They didn't look up. People almost never looked up. He studied the ship around him while he moved. This was a warship. The size of the corridors, the frequency of bulkhead doors, the organized foot traffic he glimpsed at the junction. Soldiers moving with purpose in small groups, droid units rolling between stations, suggested something capital class. The scale implied tens of thousands of personnel. He was one man with a utility belt inside what might be the most structurally hostile environment he'd ever occupied, with no map, no communications, no backup, no knowledge of local threat capabilities, and no way home that he could currently identify. He felt, beneath everything, The familiar sensation that had been with him since he was 8 years old. The cold clarity that came when everything was stripped away and only the problem remained. Good. He worked best with nothing. The soldiers at the junction rotated their patrol. He dropped soundlessly behind the one who drifted furthest from his partner, a pressure point strike to the carotid, calibrated for human physiology, hoping the biology translated and caught the body before it touched the floor. It did translate. The second soldier turned at a sound that hadn't quite happened in time, and a batarang crossed the distance in the time it took his hand to reach his radio. Batman lowered him beside his partner with the systematic care of someone taking apart a machine he intended to put back together. He took the radio. Unfamiliar language. He listened for 30 seconds, parsing rhythm, repetition, command structure. He pulled the comm link apart and attached a signal analyzer from his belt. It would need time. He had 17 minutes before the patrol rotation brought someone to check on these two. He knew this because he'd timed 3 patrol circuits since entering. He moved deeper into the ship, cataloging everything. Blast door frequencies, guard rotations, the location of what appeared to be a hangar bay based on the vibration signature through the floor plating, the structural logic of how power conduits ran along the ceiling and what they connected to. He was building a map of a world he'd never seen from first principles, and by the time the first alarm began to sound, distant, measured, the ship equivalent of a raised eyebrow rather than a scream. He had already identified 4 exit vectors, 2 of which were probably viable. Somewhere above him, in a room full of screens and uniformed officers, a security feed was showing 17 stormtroopers unconscious in a configuration that made no tactical sense to anyone who'd never studied the geometry of fear. Batman had introduced himself to the Galactic Empire. He doubted they'd appreciate the introduction. The security footage played on a loop in the ISB operations room aboard the Executor-class Heskchmanch Relentless, and Colonel Wolf Yularen watched it for the 4th time, with the particular stillness of a man whose career had been built on recognizing patterns that didn't fit. 17 stormtroopers, all incapacitated, none dead. That last detail bothered him most. In his experience, insurgents killed when they had the opportunity. Rebels killed because they were desperate and outgunned, and every stormtrooper left standing was a stormtrooper who could pursue them. The efficiency displayed in this footage was not the efficiency of desperation. It was something colder and more deliberate. The efficiency of someone who had specifically chosen not to kill, which meant someone who could have. Replay Sector 7, timestamp 1423, he said quietly. The technician obeyed. The footage showed an empty corridor. Then, for exactly 1 frame, 1 single frame at 60 captures per second, something darker than the wall behind it moved along the ceiling. Then nothing. Yularen had been watching security footage for 30 years. He had never seen anything move like that. Pull every feed from the past 40 minutes, he said. Cross-reference any anomalous motion, any door that opened without authorization code, any stormtrooper who deviated from patrol without radio contact. Sir, the technician said, fingers already moving. We have a stolen TIE fighter. Bay 7 launched approximately 11 minutes ago. The pilot bypassed the magnetic lock using a device we haven't been able to identify. The fighter's transponder is active. It's broadcasting on a frequency our systems don't recognize. Not Imperial, not Rebel, not any registered civilian band. Yularen looked at the star map. The stolen TIE was heading toward the Lothal sector, moving erratically, not fleeing, he realized, testing. The pilot was learning the controls in real time. Someone stole a TIE fighter they didn't know how to fly, he said, and they're teaching themselves mid-flight. Yes, sir. They've already corrected 3 near-terminal roll errors. Yularen was quiet for a moment. Get me a line to the Inquisitorius. The flight lasted 22 minutes. Batman had learned to fly the TIE in approximately 40 seconds. Not well, but well enough. The control philosophy was gyroscopic and responsive. more like a motorcycle than anything atmospheric he'd trained on, and the twin-ion engines responded to input with a sensitivity that punished overcorrection. He overcorrected 4 times. He compensated each time. By the 10th minute, he was flying it competently. By the 18th, he was flying it with something approaching ease. The navigational computer was the more interesting problem. It displayed star charts he had no reference for, constellations that matched nothing in his database, planet designations in the unfamiliar language his signal analyzer was still parsing. He had no way to identify where he was in relation to anywhere. He was, for the first time in memory, operating without a map. He picked a planet at random, something with atmosphere, based on the spectral data the computer provided. Something close. He angled toward it and spent the remaining flight time reviewing everything he'd observed aboard the warship, organizing it into usable intelligence. The soldiers, Stormtroopers based on what the radio traffic was beginning to give him in fragments, were disciplined but not elite. Their formations were rigid, their patrol patterns predictable, their response to an anomaly procedural rather than adaptive. Someone had trained them to follow orders effectively, not to think independently when orders ran out. That was a weakness that scaled. The weapons were energy-based, blasters, his analyzer told him, particle beam technology that would punch through his nanofiber suit at close range, but could be disrupted at the emitter with an EMP pulse. He had 6 EMP charges. He would need to be selective. The society running this warship was authoritarian, militarized, and enormous. The scale of the vessel alone implied resources that dwarfed anything he'd encountered. This wasn't a crime organization. This wasn't a corrupt government. This was something that thought in terms of star systems. The planet resolved ahead of him, green and amber through the viewport, ringed with clouds, carrying the atmospheric signature of something breathable. He entered at too steep an angle, corrected twice, and came down through the cloud layer in a controlled descent that became slightly less controlled at lower altitude, clipping a tree line before grinding to a stop in a meadow at the edge of a settlement. The TIE fighter's left wing panel crumpled. He sat in the sudden silence of a dead cockpit and listened to the sounds of a world he'd never seen, whined through grass that was too tall and faintly purple tinged at the tips. Bird calls, or something analogous, high and distant. The smell of the air, when he cracked the hatch, was extraordinary. Clean in a way Gotham had never been, rich with organic compounds, heavy with moisture. He stood on the wing of the crashed fighter and looked at the sky, which was wrong, in the specific way that skies were wrong when they weren't Earth's sky, the blue slightly too green, the sun slightly too large, the clouds moving in patterns that spoke of different atmospheric physics. He was very far from home. He allowed himself exactly 3 seconds to feel the weight of that before he closed the door on it. He had felt worse weights. He had carried worse distances. He had stood at the bottom of a pit in a foreign country with a broken back and climbed out of it because the alternative was unacceptable. This was the same problem at a different scale. He pulled a collapsible grapple from his belt and set about camouflaging the tie with his cape's emergency cover material. Not perfect concealment, but enough to break up the silhouette from aerial observation. He destroyed the transponder before landing. They could track the last known vector, but not the exact location. He had perhaps 2 hours before a search grid became precise enough to be dangerous. He moved toward the settlement at the edge of the meadow, silent and low, and was 30 meters from its perimeter when he heard voices. Human. Multiple. Speaking the language his analyzer was still decoding, followed by the unmistakable metallic percussion of weapons being readied. Not Imperial. The equipment was wrong, mismatched, civilian grade with military modifications, the kind of arsenal assembled from necessity rather than procurement. He'd seen that specific combination before, in resistance movements across 6 continents. He stepped out of the shadows into their line of sight, with his hands visible and his cape folded back so they could see he was carrying but not raising. A deliberate presentation, a calculated one. The 6 people pointing weapons at him were a mixture of species he couldn't immediately categorize. 2 humans, 1 creature with head tails he had no reference for, something tall and thin with large eyes, and 2 others, all wearing the same mismatched practical clothing of people who slept where they could and moved when they had to. The human in front, a woman in her 30s with a hard face and a blaster rifle that had seen real use, looked at him for a long moment. "What?" she said slowly. "Are you supposed to be?" Batman looked at the weapons, looked at her, read the fear behind the hardness in her expression, the exhaustion underneath that, and beneath everything else. The specific moral weight of people who had chosen a losing fight because they believed it was the right one. He recognized it. He'd looked at it in mirrors. "Someone who just made your empire very unhappy," he said. "I'm going to guess that makes us something like allies." Her name was Sarah Voss, and she didn't trust him. Batman respected that immediately. She'd kept 2 guns on him through the entire walk into the settlement. A collection of low structures built into the hillside, with the deliberate invisibility of people who had learned that being seen meant being found. Camouflage netting over the rooftops, power signatures suppressed to residential levels, the kind of operational security that came from losing people to the alternative. The settlement wasn't a village. It was a hideout that had learned to look like one. He'd cataloged 17 individuals by the time they reached the central structure, a reinforced building that served as command post, medical bay, and communal space simultaneously. The demographics told him things. Mixed species, mixed ages, the youngest a teenager who couldn't have been more than 15 and who watched Batman with the particular intensity of someone storing information rather than experiencing wonder. Useful. The oldest was a gray-haired human male who moved with a former soldier's economy and watched everything except Batman, which meant he was watching Batman hardest of all. Sarah sat across from him at a scarred table and put her blaster between them without pointing it at anything. "You came down in a TIE fighter," she said, "alone, with no squadron and no Imperial distress signal. I stole it. From where? A Star Destroyer. Outer Rim, approximately 40 light minutes from here before I adjusted course." She looked at the Twi'lek beside her, the woman with the head tails whose name he'd caught as Leon, and something passed between them. He filed it. "The Relentless," Leanne said quietly. "Yularen's ship." "You stole a TIE from Yularen's ship," Sarah said, her voice carrying the specific flatness of someone deciding whether to be impressed or more suspicious. "And you don't know how to fly a TIE. I knew how to fly it by the time I landed. You crashed. I landed with excessive momentum. There's a distinction." He looked around the room. The others were pretending not to listen with varying degrees of success. "You're a rebel cell. Small, under 20 personnel. You've been operating on this planet for at least 8 months, based on the wear patterns on your equipment and the supply rationing I can see from your food store. You've had contact with a larger rebel network, but not recently. Your communications array is dark, which means either you've lost contact or you're maintaining silence because something spooked you." The room had stopped pretending not to listen. Sarah's expression had shifted into something harder and more careful. "Who are you?" "Someone who just escaped an Imperial warship using methods your people haven't considered." He kept his voice level. "I'm not Imperial. I'm not affiliated with any faction in this galaxy. I arrived here by accident, and I have no way home that I can currently identify. What I have is a specific set of skills that your operation is missing. And what skills are those? I bring down large criminal organizations from the inside. I dismantle surveillance networks. I extract intelligence from facilities that aren't designed to give it up." He paused. "I work in the dark, and I leave nothing behind that can be traced back to the people I'm protecting." Sarah looked at him for a long time. The blaster on the table didn't move. "Show me your hands," she said. He extended them. She examined the gloves, the utility belt, the grapple housing at his wrist. Her eyes moved with professional assessment. "No blaster," she said. "I don't use them. Everyone uses blasters. I don't." She sat back. "You took down 17 Stormtroopers on Yularen's ship without killing any of them." It wasn't a question. He'd assumed the radio chatter had told them as much. "Yes." "Why?" He held her gaze. This was the question he always answered the same way, regardless of the universe he was standing in. "Because killing is a line. Once you cross it, the line moves. I don't let it move." The old soldier in the corner made a sound, not quite a laugh. Something more complicated than that. Sarah picked up the blaster and holstered it. Not trust, he didn't mistake it for trust, but a decision to table the question for now. "You eat, you sleep. Then we figure out what to do with you." He didn't sleep. He hadn't planned to. While the settlement rested in the pre-dawn stillness, he sat in the shadows outside the command post and worked. His signal analyzer had reached 60% translation of the language, enough to parse the radio traffic with reasonable accuracy. What it told him was not encouraging. The Empire's response to a stolen TE and 17 unconscious Stormtroopers was not proportional. It was overwhelming. 3 search grids were active over the Lothal sector. 2 additional Star Destroyers had been redirected. And there was a secondary communication, encrypted differently from standard Imperial channels. Routing through a relay he didn't recognize, that his analyzer flagged as originating from a separate command structure entirely. He was sitting with that when the teenager found him. She appeared from the south entrance without making a sound, which told him she'd been watching him long enough to identify his blind spot. Impressive. She was human, dark-haired, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much too young and reorganized themselves around it. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Neither did you." She sat on the ground a meter away without being invited. He noted the distance, close enough for conversation, far enough for reaction time. She'd calculated it. "My name's Davon. I run communications for the cell."
"You're 15.
16 next month. She said it without defensiveness, which told him she'd had to say it many times before. "I heard what you told Sarah about dismantling surveillance networks. You were listening from the East Corridor. The acoustics carry." She didn't blink. "The Empire has a new relay station 3 kilometers north. They finished it 6 days ago. It's patching our sector into a larger intelligence network. Once it's fully operational, they'll be able to triangulate any communication we make, encrypted or not. We go dark in 4 days." He looked at her. "And your cell leadership hasn't moved on it. Sarah wants to wait for orders from Command. Command isn't talking to us." She paused. "I've mapped the station's patrol schedule. I know where the power coupling for the primary array is located. I just can't get in without being seen." Batman was quiet for a moment. Around them, the purple-tipped grass moved in the pre-dawn wind, and something called from the tree line 3 notes, descending, repeated. "Show me the map," he said. She already had it out. He studied it for 4 minutes. Asking questions, she answered without hesitation. She'd done her homework. The patrol gaps were real. The power coupling location was logical. And she'd identified 2 approach vectors he would have chosen himself. What she lacked was the capability to exploit them without detection. He looked up from the map at the dark shape of the relay station visible on the northern hillside. Blinking lights, Imperial geometry, the quiet confidence of something that believed itself untouchable. He'd spent his entire career dismantling things that believed themselves untouchable. "Don't tell Sarah," he said. Davin's expression flickered with something that might have been relief, or excitement, or the particular feeling of someone who'd been waiting for a problem, to find the right solution. "The patrol gap opens in 40 minutes. I'll need 30. He stood, already assembling what he needed from the utility belt. "Go back inside. If anyone asks where I went, you were asleep." She stood too. "I'm coming with you." He looked at her. She looked back with the absolute steadiness of someone who had already decided and was simply informing him of the fact. He recognized that quality. He'd built his entire life on it. "Stay 6 meters behind me," he said. "Move when I move. Stop when I stop. Don't speak." She nodded once. They moved into the darkness together, and above them on the hillside, the relay station blinked its patient Imperial light, unaware that its last full night of operation had already begun. The relay station died quietly. Batman had designed it that way. Not an explosion, not a dramatic systems failure that would light up Imperial sensors across the sector, but a careful surgical removal of 3 power couplings in a sequence that made the shutdown look like a cascade fault in the station's own hardware. Imperial engineers would spend 2 days looking for the internal malfunction before they considered external interference. By then, the cell's communication window would be open, and whatever advantage the station had represented would be archaeology. Devon had performed exactly as instructed. 6 meters back, silent, stopped when he stopped. She'd also, without being asked, disabled a secondary sensor array he hadn't noticed on his initial approach. A small unit mounted low on the eastern perimeter wall, angled to catch ground-level movement. She'd spotted it because she'd been studying the station for 6 days, and he'd been studying it for 11 minutes. He filed that. She was worth more than communications work. They were back inside the settlement perimeter before the pre-dawn sky began to lighten, and he was sitting in the same spot she'd found him when Sarah emerged from the command post at first light, took one look at his expression and Davon's carefully neutral face, and understood that something had happened without being told what. She looked at the northern hillside. The relay station's lights were dark. She looked at Batman for a long time. "You work fast," she said finally. The window was available. "I hadn't authorized." "No," he agreed. "You hadn't." The silence between them carried the specific tension of 2 people who operated by different command philosophies, recognizing each other's position without conceding it. Sarah ran her cell by consensus tempered by hierarchy. Batman ran operations by singular judgment tempered by nothing. Neither of them was wrong exactly. They were simply built for different scales of problem. Before Sarah could resolve the tension in either direction, Liane appeared from the communications room with an expression that closed the argument by making it irrelevant. "We have a problem," she said. "We have a very large problem." The problem arrived 3 hours later, descending through the cloud layer in a shuttle that bore no Imperial military markings but carried the specific energy signature. Davin had explained the sensors to him in 15 efficient sentences of a vessel equipped with military-grade stealth plating. It landed 2 kilometers from the settlement in a clearing that suggested its pilot knew approximately where the settlement was without knowing precisely. Batman watched from the ridge above through a monocular he'd adapted from his belt's optical suite. The shuttle's ramp descended. One figure emerged. He was tall, nearly 2 meters, wearing a dark, layered outfit that wasn't quite military and wasn't quite civilian, carrying a double-bladed weapon at his hip that Batman had been briefed on during the fast, intense conversation in the command post. A lightsaber, the weapon of a Force user, an Inquisitor, the 5th brother. Leon had pulled up what the cell had on the Inquisitorius. Former Jedi or Force-sensitive individuals twisted into instruments of Imperial enforcement, hunting the survivors of something called Order 66. They were not soldiers, they were predators, and they were dispatched for problems that Stormtroopers couldn't solve. The 5th brother stood in the clearing and did nothing for approximately 45 seconds. Then he turned and looked directly at the ridge where Batman was lying flat in the grass. Invisible by every conventional measure, Batman went absolutely still. The Inquisitor's gaze didn't waver. He couldn't see Batman. Batman was certain of this from the geometry of sight lines and concealment. But he was looking at the right place with the specific attention of someone receiving information from a source that didn't rely on eyes, the Force. It was reading the environment, and something in that environment was registering as unusual. Not Batman's presence exactly, Sarah had told him that Jedi and their dark side equivalents could sense living beings through this energy field, but something about him was causing interference in that reading, like static at the edge of a signal. He'd been called many things in his life. A void in the Force was new. He withdrew from the ridge in absolute silence, processing what he'd observed. The fifth brother was a problem that his standard approach, shadows, misdirection, precision strikes, might not solve cleanly. A being who could sense his presence without seeing him, who carried a weapon that would cut through his suit, who possessed physical capabilities beyond human baseline. He needed more information before engagement. He needed it in approximately 90 minutes. Based on the rate the Inquisitor was moving toward the settlement. He got 45 minutes of it from Sarah, who spoke about the Inquisitorious, with the compressed fury of someone who had lost people to them. The fifth brother was powerful, sadistic, and persistent. He had cleared 3 rebel cells in the past year. He operated alone because he preferred it. Other Inquisitors were competition rather than allies. His technique relied on terror and overwhelming Force-assisted combat. He was fast beyond human reckoning. His lightsaber could be thrown and recalled, and he could use something called a Force push that would hit like a concussive vehicle strike. "Has anyone fought one and won?" Batman asked. "Survived," Sarah corrected. "Not won." "What's the distinction?" "Winning implies the Inquisitors stopped. They don't stop." He thought about that. "What stops them?" She was quiet for a moment. "Jedi, sometimes. You don't have any." "No," he stood. "Get everyone into the lower tunnels. Seal the blast doors. Don't come out until I give you a specific signal." He described the signal. 3 short, 1 long on the exterior comm panel, a pattern they agreed on in 30 seconds. Sarah grabbed his arm as he turned. Not restraining, grounding. "You're one person, with no Force ability, against an Inquisitor." "I've fought things that could move faster than I could see," he said. "Things that could read my intentions before I acted on them. Things that were genuinely unkillable." He met her eyes. "The Force can sense living things. It can sense intention. But it can't sense a plan that doesn't exist yet, one that's built moment to moment from whatever's available." He paused. "I don't plan fights. I read them." He left her with that and moved toward the northern perimeter. He found his position, high ground, broken terrain, 3 fallback vectors, and waited. The fifth brother emerged from the tree line 17 minutes later. He walked without urgency, his double-bladed lightsaber unlit but in hand. He scanned the settlement with red-rimmed eyes that caught the morning light and gave it back wrong. He stopped in the open ground, before the settlement's main entrance, and ignited the blade. The red light split the morning air like a wound. "I know you're here," the Inquisitor said. His voice carried the particular resonance of someone accustomed to being heard. "Whatever you are, the Force shows me everyone in this settlement, frightened, small, hiding. But you," he turned slowly, red blade casting its light across the buildings. "You are a shadow that casts no reflection. Come out, shadow. I am curious." Batman dropped from the roof of the eastern structure 12 meters directly behind the Inquisitor and drove a compressed charge batarang into the ground at the man's feet simultaneously with landing. The explosion wasn't designed to harm. It was designed to disorient. The fifth brother moved with Force-assisted speed, spinning toward the source of the drop, blade sweeping in an arc that would have bisected a normal person. Batman was already moving laterally, cape flaring, and the blade cut through the trailing edge of fabric rather than the body beneath it. He felt the heat of it, extraordinary, near instant, and cataloged it without panic. Close. Too close for comfort, too far for consequence. He was already gone, back into the broken terrain, and the Inquisitor turned again with his red blade painting the ground. The curiosity in the Inquisitor's voice had become something else, something sharper. "Interesting," the fifth brother said, and smiled. Batman crouched behind a stone outcropping with 4 EMP charges, 2 batarangs, and a mind rapidly constructing a fight he hadn't planned yet from whatever was available. concluded that the next several minutes were going to require his complete attention. He gave them everything he had. The fight lasted 11 minutes. Batman would later. In the 3 quiet seconds he allowed himself before the next problem, categorize it as the most technically demanding engagement of his life, which was a significant statement from a man who had traded blows with a Kryptonian and survived an encounter with a being made entirely of fear. The fifth brother was fast in a way that redefined the word. Not metahuman fast, not the mechanical speed of enhanced genetics or technological augmentation, but organically, fluidly fast. The kind of speed that came from a body receiving information before the body's owner consciously processed it. The Force was feeding him data. Every shift of Batman's weight, every micro-tension in his muscles that preceded movement. The Inquisitor was reading all of it a half second before it happened, so Batman stopped planning his movements. It was the hardest thing he'd done in 11 minutes of extremely hard things. Every instinct he'd developed across 20 years of combat was built on strategy. Read the opponent, anticipate, position for the next exchange while executing the current one. Against the fifth brother, that instinct was a liability. Strategy created intention. Intention created a signal. The Force foreread the signal, and the Inquisitor moved before the strategy could execute. He fought instead on pure reaction, moment to moment. No anticipation, no plan. Just response to what was directly in front of him, assembled from whatever the environment offered in real time. It worked imperfectly and expensively. He took a force push to the chest in the 3rd minute that lifted him 4 meters and deposited him against a stone wall with enough force to crack 2 ribs. He cataloged the pain with the professional detachment of someone who had learned that pain was information rather than experience. He lost his grapple housing to a lightsaber strike in the 6th minute, the blade shearing through the wrist mount cleanly, and spent 30 seconds recalculating his mobility options without it. He deployed 2 of his 6 EMP charges, both ineffective against a target with no electronics, before redirecting them toward the settlement's perimeter lights, plunging the eastern approach into darkness that the Inquisitor navigated by Force sense and Batman navigated by memory. What he achieved in 11 minutes was not victory. It was information. He learned the fifth brother's rhythm, the specific way his Force-assisted speed operated in bursts rather than continuously, the quarter-second window between those bursts where he moved at merely exceptional human speed. He learned that the Inquisitor's arrogance was structural. He expected opposition to break, and when it didn't, he escalated force rather than changing approach. He learned that the spinning lightsaber throw, a technique Sarah had warned him about, required a 2-second telegraph that began in the left shoulder. He also learned that 2 cracked ribs and a missing grapple housing were going to significantly complicate the next phase. The 11th minute ended when Batman used his final smoke pellet, a dense chemical compound that defeated both conventional vision and, critically, interfered with the thermal and electromagnetic sensing that he'd deduced the Force partially operated through in close combat, and ran, not retreating, repositioning. There was a meaningful distinction, and he held on to it while running. He put 3 kilometers between himself and the settlement before stopping, choosing high ground in a rock formation that offered overlapping sight lines and 3 exit routes. He sat with his back against stone and breathed carefully around the ribs. Shallow, controlled, the specific breathing pattern that managed pain without compromising oxygenation. And thought. The fifth brother would not pursue immediately. Batman had read enough of him to know that the Inquisitor operated from a position of absolute confidence in his own inevitability. He would let his quarry run. He would use the Force to track. He would arrive when he chose to, not when Batman chose, and the gap between those 2 timetables was the only leverage available. He needed a solution that didn't involve fighting the Inquisitor again on the Inquisitor's terms. He needed options, which meant he needed resources. which meant he needed to understand the broader landscape of this planet and this galaxy well enough to identify who else had something to offer. His signal analyzer had reached 80% translation now, enough to parse most of what he encountered. He pulled every piece of intelligence he'd absorbed since arrival and spread it across his mind like a tactical map. The Empire, vast, authoritarian, hunting him specifically, not an option. The rebel cell, 17 people with mismatched weapons and a communications blackout, valuable for local knowledge, not equipped for his immediate problem. That left the third signal, the one his analyzer had flagged during the night, the encrypted communication routing through a relay he didn't recognize, on a frequency that was neither Imperial nor Rebel. He'd identified its ground-based origin point during his ridge observation, a structure 12 kilometers southwest, built low into a valley, with no visible Imperial markings and no Rebel operational signature. Independent. In a galaxy divided between Empire and Rebellion, independent meant either extremely dangerous or extremely resourceful, usually both. He was weighing the approach when the voice came from directly above him. You fought an Inquisitor and walked away. He was on his feet and positioned before the sentence finished, pain in his ribs registering as secondary data. The figure above him, perched on the highest point of the rock formation with the casual balance of someone for whom heights were irrelevant, was a woman, human, approximately his age, dressed in the neutral practical clothing of someone who wanted to be mistaken for nothing in particular. No Imperial markings, no Rebel insignia, a lightsaber on her hip that was unlit and had been modified. The housing was wrong for standard design, rebuilt from components that weren't original. A Jedi, hiding. Most people don't walk away from the fifth brother, she said. She climbed down the rock face with easy competence and stopped 4 meters from him, close enough for conversation, far enough for options. He noted that she'd chosen the same distance Davin had chosen. You're not force sensitive. I'd have felt it. No, he agreed, but he couldn't read you properly. Apparently not. She studied him with the specific attention of someone accustomed to reading people through a sense he didn't have access to. Whatever she was getting from him, or not getting, made her expression do something complicated. My name is Kira Voss. I've been on Lothal for 4 months. I've been watching your cell for 2 of them. Watching, he said, not helping. I help when I can do more good than harm. 1 Jedi against the fifth brother is a death that helps no one. She paused, but 1 Jedi and whatever you are might be a different calculation. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back without flinching, which told him she was either very brave or had spent long enough in fear that it had become background noise. Either quality was useful. What do you know about a structure 12 kilometers southwest? He said. Low Valley, independent communications signature. Something moved through her expression. Recognition, complicated by something he couldn't immediately read. The Hutt's man, she said. A broker named Drellick. He runs supply and intelligence for Jabba's network in this sector. She paused. He's been trying to make contact with the rebel cell for 3 months. Sarah won't deal with Hutts. Batman thought about that. About the specific shape of a man with no allies in a galaxy at war, with 2 cracked ribs and a dead grapple housing, being hunted by a force-sensitive predator and an Imperial intelligence network. He thought about the difference between principles and survival and the point at which survival became necessary for principles to mean anything. Tell me everything you know about Drellick, he said. Kira raised an eyebrow. Jabba's people don't offer things for free. Nothing does. He was already moving southwest, adjusting his stride for the ribs. Tell me while we walk. Drellick was a Rhodian who had learned that the most profitable position in any war was directly between the people fighting it. He operated from a structure that had been a moisture farming station in a previous life and had been converted, with considerable investment and no permits, into something that functioned simultaneously as a cantina, a warehouse, a communications hub, and a negotiating table. The valley location was deliberate, below sensor horizon for both Imperial patrols and Rebel surveillance, accessible by 3 different approach routes that allowed clients to arrive without being observed by other clients. It was, Batman recognized immediately, the infrastructure of someone who had built their entire business model on knowing things other people didn't and selling that knowledge to whoever could afford it. He'd known people like Drellick in Gotham. He'd put most of them in prison. Today he needed one. Kira had given him the essential intelligence during the 12-kilometer wall walk. Drellick had been trying to broker a deal with the Rebel cell for months, offering supply routes and Imperial patrol schedules in exchange for the cell disrupting a specific shipment. A rival Hutt spice cargo moving through the sector under Imperial escort. Sarah had refused on the grounds that working with Hutt interests meant accepting Hutt methods, which included slave labor, trafficking, and the specific moral catastrophe that the Hutt cartel represented in its entirety. Her position was principled and strategically costly. She'd lost 3 supply lines in the past month that Drellick's information could have protected. Batman had listened to all of this without comment. He was building a picture. They entered through the eastern approach, Kira's preferred route, which she'd used before, and Drellick's people met them at the door. 2 Gamorreans with force pikes and the professional blankness of security that had seen everything and been surprised by nothing until they saw Batman. Then they were briefly surprised. He filed that as useful and followed Kira inside. Drellick was at the back of the main room, seated at a table that had a view of every entrance, with a half-finished drink and a datapad he didn't look up from when they approached. He was small for his species, with the quick eyes of someone who processed information continuously and the stillness of someone who had learned that showing reaction was showing weakness. He looked up when they sat. His gaze moved from Kira, acknowledged with the familiarity of prior contact, to Batman, where it stopped. "The human ghost," he said, in accented basic that Batman's translator now handled with reasonable accuracy. "You've caused significant disruption to Colonel Yularen's schedule. There's a bounty posted. 40,000 credits." He set down his datapad. "You're worth more than most Rebel commanders. Yularen is personally irritated, which is unusual. He's not a man who irritates easily." "Good," Batman said. Drellick's eyes moved with calculation. "You're not here to hide. People who want to hide don't walk into my establishment 20 hours after escaping an Imperial Star Destroyer. I'm here because you have something I need and I have something you want. What could you possibly have that I want?" Batman looked at him steadily. "Access." Drellick was quiet for a moment, his green fingers still on the datapad. "Access to what? To whatever you point me at." He leaned forward slightly. "You've been trying to reach the Rebel cell for 3 months. Their commander won't deal with you, because dealing with you means endorsing everything your employer represents. That position isn't going to change." He paused. "But I'm not their commander, and I'm not bound by their politics. I'm a single contractor with no ideological obligations and a specific skill set. Tell me what you need disrupted, and I'll tell you what it'll cost." Kira, beside him, said nothing. He'd told her before they entered that he needed her silence during the negotiation, and she'd given him a look that said she had significant reservations that she was temporarily filing. He'd accepted that arrangement. Drellick picked up his drink, set it down without drinking from it. "The 5th brother is looking for you. I know. He'll find you within 48 hours. The Force doesn't lose things it's looking for. Then we have 48 hours to make this conversation productive." Batman held the Rhodian's gaze. "The shipment. The rival Hutt's spice cargo under Imperial escort. What's the route and what's the timeline?" Drellick studied him for a long moment with the particular attention of someone recalculating a set of odds. "The cargo moves through the Lothal system in 31 hours. 3 Imperial frigates as escort. A show of force, Jabba believes, because the governor is taking a percentage and wants the arrangement to look legitimate. The cargo transfers at a relay point in the upper atmosphere before moving to hyperspace. He paused. Disrupting the transfer requires someone inside the Imperial escort formation, not alongside it, inside. In a stolen tie with a crumpled wing panel, Kira said quietly, unable to entirely maintain the silence she'd agreed to. The tie is a problem I'll solve separately, Batman said. He looked at Drellick. What I need from you first is specific. The Imperial data fortress in the Northern District. I went in once and identified what's there. I need access codes for the secondary archive, the deep intelligence files, not the operational layer. Your people have a contact inside. Drellick's stillness shifted fractionally. That's a significant ask. It's a proportional trade. The shipment disruption is worth considerably more to Jabba than an archive access code. What do you want from the archive? Batman had prepared for this question and decided on the truth, because the truth was the more useful answer in this context. I need to understand the full scope of Imperial operations in this sector. Who reports to whom, what facilities exist, where the decision-making authority sits. I'm operating without a map in a war I don't fully understand. I need the map. Drellick looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Kira. Your new friend is either the most dangerous person to enter this valley in a year, or the most delusional. Both can be true, Kira said. Drellick picked up his datapad and typed something, pushed it across the table. On the screen was a string of characters, access codes. Batman's translator confirmed, with location data attached. The contact is a human named Ress. He works the night rotation at the fortress. He owes me 3 favors, and this will settle all of them. He paused. Don't get him killed. That's not my preference, Batman said, and pocketed the datapad. They left through the northern approach, moving through the valley's shadow as the Lothal sun descended toward the horizon and painted the purple-tipped grass in amber. Kira walked beside him without speaking for a kilometer, which he recognized as someone organizing what they wanted to say.
You just made a deal with a Hutt intermediary,
she said finally. I made a deal with an independent broker who works for a Hutt. There's a distinction. Sarah won't see it that way. Sarah doesn't need to see it anyway. This isn't Sarah's operation. He kept his voice level. Not dismissive, he respected Sarah's judgment, but he'd spent 20 years making decisions that other people's moral frameworks couldn't accommodate. And he'd learned to carry that weight without distributing it. What I extracted from the archive will benefit the entire cell. The shipment disruption keeps Drellick cooperative. The access code gives me the map I need to operate effectively in this sector.
And the 5th brother?
He was quiet for a moment. The amber light was doing something interesting to the landscape, softening it in a way that made the Imperial relay station's dark remains on the northern hillside look almost peaceful. The archive will tell me where the 5th brother's orders originate, he said, who he reports to. What happens if he fails to produce results? Every system has a hierarchy. Every hierarchy has pressure points. He paused. He's a predator built to hunt Jedi. I'm going to change what he's hunting. Kira stopped walking. He stopped beside her and looked at what she was looking at. The Lothal sky, deepening toward purple at the zenith, the first stars becoming visible. Stars he couldn't name. A sky that belonged to no constellation he'd ever memorized. You've been here less than 2 days, she said quietly. You've disrupted an Imperial relay station, survived the 5th brother, negotiated with a Hutt broker, and you're planning to infiltrate an Imperial data fortress. She paused. What are you actually trying to accomplish? It was the right question. He'd been asking it himself since the rift opened. Right now, he said, understand the board. All of it. Every piece, every player, every line of force between them. I don't fight wars. I dismantle systems. But I can't dismantle what I can't see. He looked at the unfamiliar stars. I need to see everything. Kira was quiet for a moment. Then, the Force shows me what living things feel, their intentions, their fears. She looked at him. When I try to read you, I get almost nothing, a shape where a person should be. like looking at a shadow and finding no light source. He looked back at her. Is that a problem? She considered it. In this galaxy, she said, a man the Force can't read, working in shadows, dismantling systems from the inside. She began walking again. It might be the most dangerous thing the Empire has ever faced. Batman looked at the stars one moment longer, then followed her into the coming dark. The Imperial Data Fortress had 43 security layers. Batman counted them during the 40-minute observation window. He allowed himself from the high ground east of the facility, lying flat in the grass with his optical suite, cataloging everything that moved, everything that didn't move but should have, and everything that wasn't moving in a way that suggested it was trying very hard to look like it wasn't security. 43. It was, objectively, the most sophisticated physical security architecture he'd encountered since infiltrating the League of Shadows' primary compound in his 3rd year of training. Ra's al Ghul had understood that the most dangerous security wasn't the kind that stopped intruders. It was the kind that let them believe they'd gotten in, then closed around them. Batman had spent 6 hours inside that compound before he'd understood what was happening. He had approximately 4 hours before the Fifth Brother's tracking became precise enough to endanger the cell. He allocated 90 minutes for infiltration, 60 for extraction, leaving a working window of 90 minutes inside the archive. It was tight by his standards and impossible by most others. He went in through the water reclamation system. Every large facility in every universe required water management. The biological needs of personnel created a hydraulic logic that was consistent across architectures. The reclamation intake on the fortress's eastern face was designed to filter external contamination, not to stop a person who understood the specific pressure differentials that controlled the intake valves. He spent 11 minutes in water that was cold enough to be a medical problem if he'd been less disciplined about core temperature management. Moving through a passage designed for maintenance droids, roughly half his shoulder width, and emerged into a utility corridor behind a thermal exchanger that smelled of ozone and machine oil. He found Ress 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The contact was a middle-aged human, with the specific physiognomy of someone who had spent years being frightened and had reorganized his face around it. Shallow eyes, compressed mouth, the permanent slight hunch of someone who moved through official spaces, hoping not to be noticed. He was exactly what Drellick had described, and the 3 favors Drellick had called in were visible in every line of his posture. A man paying a debt he'd hoped to avoid. Batman didn't waste time on reassurance. Reassurance took longer than information and delivered less. He took the secondary archive codes, confirmed the location of the Deep Intelligence Terminal, gave Ress a specific window to establish an alibi, and moved. The Deep Intelligence Terminal was on the 3rd sublevel, behind a biometric lock that Ress's codes handled and a secondary mechanical seal that Batman handled with a torsion pick in 40 seconds. The room beyond was small and cold. Server architecture required temperature management that made intelligence repositories feel like standing inside a refrigerated logic engine, which was essentially what they were. He plugged his signal analyzer into the terminal's data port and set it running while he worked the interface manually. His translation was at 92% now, sufficient for operational intelligence, occasionally ambiguous on cultural nuance. He pulled everything tagged to the Lothal sector. What he found reorganized his understanding of the situation in ways he hadn't anticipated. The Imperial operation in this sector wasn't primarily military. It was administrative, the specific machinery of control applied to a population through resource extraction, information management, and the calibrated application of force at precisely the threshold required to prevent organized resistance from cohering. The Star Destroyer presence was theater. The real architecture was in the data. Census records cross-referenced with dissidence indicators, economic controls that made independent survival increasingly difficult, communication monitoring that identified patterns rather than content. It was a system, an elegant, comprehensive, deeply functional system for making people too tired and too afraid to fight back. He'd seen versions of it in Gotham. He'd spent 15 years fighting the symptoms without always clearly seeing the structure. Here, laid out in imperial bureaucratic precision, the structure was visible in its entirety. And it was both impressive and profoundly answerable, because systems had failure points in proportion to their complexity. He found the failure points methodically, 43 of them in the Lothal sector alone. Supply chain vulnerabilities, personnel dependencies, communication bottleneck sequence that disrupted in the Punjagwats would cascade through the administrative structure faster than the military response could compensate. He copied everything his analyzer could carry. Then he found the file on the fifth brother. It was not, as he'd expected, an operational file. Mission parameters, target lists, performance metrics. It was a psychological assessment compiled by Imperial intelligence, cross-referenced with Inquisitorius command. Detailed, clinical, and in its clinical precision, unexpectedly revealing. The fifth brother had been taken for force training at age 6. His psychological profile showed a man who had learned to replace an identity stripped from him with the pure function of what he'd been made. A hunter defined entirely by pursuit. His effectiveness came not from sadism, though the file documented that, but from the specific pathology of someone who had no self outside the mission. Remove the mission, and there was nothing. Batman sat with that for a moment. Then he pulled the command structure. The fifth brother reported to the Grand Inquisitor, who reported directly to Darth Vader, who reported to the Emperor. That hierarchy was known. What wasn't known, what the archive revealed, was a secondary reporting line, a direct communication channel between the fifth brother's operational log and an office in Imperial Center that wasn't military intelligence or Inquisitorius command. It was tagged with a bureaucratic designation he needed 3 translation passes to decode: the Emperor's personal office. Someone at the top of the Imperial hierarchy was monitoring this operation personally, not the search for rebel cells. That was routine. The specific anomaly, the unreadable presence. Him. The Force had reached the top of the food chain with a report that something had arrived in this galaxy that it couldn't categorize, and the man who sat at the apex of Force-based power in the known galaxies had taken a personal interest. He copied that file too. He was back in the utility corridor with 6 minutes remaining in his window when the facility's lighting shifted from white to amber. Not an alarm, his experience of the place told him, but a status change. He pressed himself behind the thermal exchanger and listened. Footsteps, multiple, moving with the specific cadence of people who knew where they were going and believed they had authority over everything in their path. He looked through a ventilation gap into the main corridor. Stormtroopers, a full squad, 16, moving in standard search formation. Behind them, in the unhurried way of someone for whom urgency was a concept that applied to other people, walked a figure in black armor that was simultaneously the most and least surprising thing Batman had seen in 2 days. Darth Vader, not a hologram, not intelligence reports. The man himself, nearly 2 meters of mechanical augmentation and dark presence, moving through the facility's amber light with the absolute authority of someone who had never in their life needed to wonder if they were the most dangerous thing in a room. Batman went completely still. Vader stopped in the corridor, precisely at the ventilation gap Batman was looking through. Not looking at it, looking past it, head slightly tilted in the specific way the fifth brother had tilted his head on the ridge, but with a quality of attention that made the Inquisitor's version feel like a rough draft. The Force pressed against Batman's mind like a hand against glass. He felt it. Not like telepathy, not like any psychic intrusion he'd trained against, but as a pressure, a weight, a certainty that something vast and attentive was looking at him from a direction that didn't correspond to any physical angle. His mental discipline, 20 years of building walls inside himself, compartmentalizing grief and rage and the specific darkness of a child who had watched his parents die and decided to make the entire world pay for it in the currency of justice. Those walls held. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The pressure found surfaces and slid off them. Vader stood for 4 seconds, 5, 6. Then he spoke, not to anyone visible, in a voice that resonated through the amber-lit corridor like something geological. "Find it," he said. "Whatever it is. I want it brought to me intact." He walked on. The stormtroopers followed. Batman released a breath he'd been holding for 7 seconds, checked his window, and moved with considerable urgency toward the water reclamation exit. He had what he'd come for. He had considerably more than he'd come for. And Darth Vader was now personally involved, which changed every calculation he'd been building since the rift opened. He moved through the cold water with his mind already 3 steps ahead, assembling new variables into new frameworks, building a plan from the wreckage of the one he'd arrived with. The board had changed. The board kept changing. He was starting to think that was the only constant this galaxy offered. This was not his instinct. His instinct, built across 2 decades of operating alone, of trusting information only to the degree that trust was operationally necessary, was to distribute intelligence on a need-to-know basis, keeping the full picture inside his own head where it was safest. But he was one person in a galaxy he didn't understand, with cracked ribs and a compromised equipment loadout. And Darth Vader had just personally entered the calculation. Need to know had expanded considerably. He laid it out in the settlement's command post with Sarah, Kira, Davan, and the old soldier, whose name was Breck, and who had been a Republic clone trooper before the Empire existed. A detail that added layers to his silence Batman was still processing. Sitting around the scarred table, he presented the intelligence in the order that mattered. The administrative control architecture, the 43 failure points, the fifth brother's psychological profile, and finally, the file that had reorganized everything, the Emperor's personal interest. The secondary monitoring channel. Sarah's expression moved through several stages. Vader came himself. He was already in the sector. The archive had his movement log. He'd been traveling between Imperial facilities for a week. My arrival accelerated his schedule. Batman paused. He wasn't there for the cell. He was there because whatever report reached the Emperor's office about an unreadable anomaly was interesting enough to warrant a personal inspection. "You," Kira said, "the concept of me, something the Force can't categorize arriving in a galaxy where the Force categorizes everything." He looked at the archive data spread across the table. Vader isn't coming here because he wants to destroy a rebel cell. He's coming here because he's curious. And curiosity, in someone that powerful, is more dangerous than hostility. Breck spoke for the first time since Batman had begun. His voice had the texture of someone who'd kept it stored for a long time. "You said 43 failure points in the sector's control architecture." He looked at the data with the eyes of someone who had spent years knowing a system was vulnerable without being able to prove it. How long to exploit them? Sequentially, months. In the right order, with the right resources applied at the right moments, 3 weeks. Maybe 2. Batman looked at him. But that's a separate problem. The immediate problem is the fifth brother, who has approximately, he checked his internal timeline, 19 hours before his tracking narrows to this location. And behind him, at an indeterminate interval, Vader. "So we run," Sarah said. It wasn't defeatism, it was operational pragmatism, and he respected it as such. Running solves the immediate problem and abandons every advantage we've built in the last 48 hours. He kept his voice level. The archive data, the Drellic arrangement, the 43 failure points, all of that becomes archaeology the moment this cell evacuates Lothal. You spend the next 3 months re-establishing operational footing somewhere new, and the Empire's administrative control here continues undisturbed. "What's the alternative?" Leon said. "We use the fifth brother." The room was quiet in the specific way. Rooms got quiet when an idea was so far outside expected parameters that it took a moment for the people in the room to confirm they'd heard it correctly. Use him, Sarah repeated. His psychological profile gives us something. He's defined entirely by the hunt. Remove the quarry and he has nothing. But more importantly, redirect the quarry and he follows. Batman looked at Kira. He's hunting two things, the rebel cell and me. If we separate those targets and give him a more compelling version of the second one, he stops being a threat to the first. Kira understood before he finished. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to use the thing that makes me interesting to the Empire as bait. The unreadable presence, the Force anomaly. He paused. The fifth brother and Vader both want the same thing. They want to understand what I am. I can control when and where they pursue that understanding. And the shipment, Daven said. She'd been silent through the briefing, which Batman had learned, meant she was processing rather than disengaged. Drellick's arrangement. That's in. She checked her own internal count, 22 hours, 21. The timing works if we move tonight. Sarah looked at him across the table with the expression of someone taking the measure of a person they still weren't sure they trusted. You're proposing we let you run a simultaneous operation, bait the fifth brother, hit the shipment, and keep Vader from finding the cell, with 19 hours and a Jedi in hiding. And you, he said, your people know this terrain. I need that knowledge more than I need anything else right now. She was quiet for a long moment. The amber light of the command post made everyone's faces look like something carved from the decision they were about to make. Tell me the plan, she said. All of it. He told them all of it. That took 40 minutes and generated 47 questions, most of which were good ones. Breck's were the best. Tactical, precise, asking specifically about failure conditions rather than success scenarios, which was the mark of someone who had survived long enough to understand that planning anything for success was optimism, and planning for failure was strategy. The plan had 4 components running in parallel. Component 1. Davin and Leon would use the Archive's communication vulnerability. One of the 43 failure points, a poorly encrypted relay in the Imperial garrison's northern outpost, to transmit a false signal suggesting Batman's location was 40 kilometers southeast, in the marshlands near the planet's second settlement. This would redirect the fifth brother's tracking for approximately 6 hours. Enough time. Component 2. Batman and Breck would move to the Lothal upper atmosphere staging point, where Drellick's shipment transfer would occur. Breck knew a contact with a working transport, not a tie, something with both wings intact, and the Archive had given Batman the escort formation's exact configuration. 3 frigates, arranged in a triangular pattern with the cargo shuttle at center. The vulnerability was the transition moment when the shuttle transferred from frigate escort to hyperspace tug. A 90-second window where the escort formation opened and the shuttle's own defenses were primary. Component 3. Kira would draw the fifth brother when the false signal failed, not to fight him, but to lead him. She knew Lothal's terrain in a way Batman didn't, and the specific canyon system in the planet's southern region had properties she'd described during their walk that made sustained force sense tracking difficult. Geological interference, she'd said. Something in the rock composition disrupted the ambient force signature. She'd been using it to hide for 4 months. Batman had listened to that and thought about a man whose entire identity was the hunt, being led into terrain where the hunt became unreliable, and what that did to a psychology built on total confidence. Component 4 was the one that nobody liked. If Vader arrives before the other 3 components complete, Batman said, I meet him. You meet him, Sarah said flatly. Alone, in a location of my choosing, not his. He looked around the table. He wants to understand what I am. I give him the conversation. I control the terms, the location, the duration, and the information I provide. Vader is many things. The Archive was specific about this, but he is not impulsive. He thinks. He calculates. A conversation with something that doesn't fit his understanding of the universe is more interesting to him than destroying it.
You're betting your life on Darth Vader's intellectual curiosity,
Kira said. I'm betting on the psychological profile of someone who was once something else entirely before the Empire made him what he is. He paused. The archive had his history too. What he was, what he lost. That information and his leverage of a different kind. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Breck broke it. I've fought beside Jedi, he said quietly. I've fought against things that should have been impossible to fight. I've never met anyone who plans like you do. He looked at Batman steadily. You plan like you're the only variable you can control, so you control it completely. Batman held the old soldier's gaze. That's exactly right. Breck nodded once, the specific nod of someone who had made a decision and filed the doubts alongside it. I know where to get the transport. They moved out in pairs 90 minutes before the Lothal night reached its deepest point. Davin and Leon north, moving with the practiced silence of people who'd learned stealth through necessity. Kira south, alone, carrying the weight of a plan that required her to deliberately attract the attention of something that had made her spend 4 months learning to be invisible. She paused at the settlement's southern perimeter and looked back at Batman. The canyon system, she said. If something goes wrong, if the timing breaks down, it won't. If it does, he looked at her. She was carrying more than the plan. She was carrying 4 months of isolation and the specific courage of someone who had kept their humanity intact through circumstances designed to erode it. He respected that in a way that didn't have a convenient language. Southern Canyon, third tributary, he said. I'll find you. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned and disappeared into the dark, with the confidence of someone who had finally stopped running and started moving towards something. Batman watched the darkness where she'd been for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned north to find Breck and the transport with the archived data in his analyzer, the plan in his head, and Darth Vader somewhere above him in the dark between stars, turning the problem of an impossible anomaly over in a mind that had once belonged to someone else entirely. The board kept changing. He kept playing. The upper atmosphere of Lothal was the color of a bruise. Batman had learned this during the ascent, the transport's viewport showing the planet's surface falling away beneath them, the sky transitioning through amber and violet and deep indigo before surrendering to the absolute black of space. From down there, it had looked peaceful. From up here, where 3 Imperial frigates held their triangular formation in low orbit, and a cargo shuttle waited at their center like something precious and dangerous. Peace was a concept that belonged to a different altitude. Breck flew with the specific competence of someone who had piloted military vessels under conditions that made this look administrative. He'd said nothing during the ascent, which Batman had used to run the operation's timing one final time, checking each component against the others, looking for the gap where everything came apart. He found 3. He made contingency plans for 2 of them and accepted that the third, Kira reaching the canyon system before the 5th brother's tracking recovered, was outside his control, which was the kind of variable he'd spent his entire life trying to eliminate and had never fully succeeded in eliminating, because the universe consistently declined to be fully controllable. Escort formation is adjusting, Breck said quietly. His eyes were on the sensor display, a circular screen showing the 3 frigates as geometric shapes, moving in the slow, confident rotation of vessels that didn't expect to be threatened. Transfer window opens in 4 minutes. Hold position. Batman moved to the transport's equipment bay and checked his loadout for the final time. He'd replaced the destroyed grapple housing with a salvaged unit from the settlement's equipment stores, older, heavier, with a lower tensile rating than his standard, but functional. His EMP charges, 4 remaining, 11. The suit had been field repaired where the lightsaber had taken the trailing edge. Not perfect, but the integrity held. The ribs had moved from acute pain to managed discomfort, which was the best available outcome. He pulled up the escort formation on his own display. 3 frigates, triangular arrangement. Each frigate approximately 800 meters from the next. The cargo shuttle at the center was a Gozanti-class transport with its own defensive turrets, 4 of them positioned at the corners of the hull. During the transfer window, when the hyperspace tug locked onto the shuttle's dorsal coupling, those turrets rotated to accommodate the tug's approach vector, creating a 40-second blind arc on the shuttle's ventral surface. He needed to be on the hull in that 40-second window. 2 minutes, Breck said. Batman moved to the transport's ventral airlock, sealed his rebreather, and waited with the specific patience of someone who had learned that the 30 seconds before action was best spent being completely still. The comms crashed. Devon's voice, compressed by distance and encryption. False signal is holding. Fifth brother changed vector 40 minutes ago. He's in the southeast marshlands. A pause. Kira has reached the canyon entrance. Both components holding. He exhaled slowly. Transfer window, Breck said. Now. The airlock opened into silence and cold that was immediately absolute. Batman crossed the gap between the transport and the shuttle's hull on the grapple line. 112 meters of empty space, with Lothal's bruised atmosphere below, and the hard geometry of Imperial frigates filling his peripheral vision, close enough that he could see the gun emplacements tracking on their automated arcs. The grapple caught the shuttle's ventral hull plating with a magnetic thud he felt through his gloves but couldn't hear. He pulled himself in and moved fast across the hull toward the primary coupling access panel, the blind arc closing around him as the hyperspace tug locked onto the dorsal connection above. 28 seconds remaining in the window. He was through the access panel in 19. The shuttle's interior was pressurized and lit in the red emergency lighting of active docking protocol. 2 crew members in the main bay, both facing the dorsal coupling interface, monitoring the tug connection. Neither looking down. He was past them and into the cargo hold in seconds, moving along the ceiling in the specific way he'd moved along the ceiling of the Star Destroyer 2 days ago. Though the ceiling here was lower and the stakes were different. The cargo was in sealed containers, 12 of them, arranged in 2 rows, bearing the markings of a Hutt distribution network beneath a layer of Imperial Customs sealing. He wasn't here for the cargo. He was here for the nav computer. The shuttle's flight computer was in the forward compartment, behind a locked door that his signal analyzer handled in 31 seconds. He plugged in, pulled the hyperspace route data, and uploaded the archive package Drellick had specified. A modified course correction that would redirect the shuttle post-jump to a set of coordinates that were neither the intended destination nor anywhere the Imperial escort would expect. The Hutt's receiving point. Jabba's arrangement fulfilled. He was back through the cargo hold and into the access panel in 4 minutes and 40 seconds, sealing it behind him, emerging onto the hull as the transfer window closed and the turrets completed their rotation back to standard coverage. The grapple line crossed the gap. He was back in the transport's airlock with a racing heart that he managed through controlled breathing and the specific satisfaction of an operation that had executed within acceptable parameters. Then the transport's sensors screamed. Breck's voice was completely flat. Star Destroyer, dropping out of hyperspace, 2 kilometers off the port frigate, not the Relentless. The sensor silhouette was different, larger, the specific geometry of an executor class. Batman was at the viewport in 4 steps. The Star Destroyer Chimera emerged from hyperspace with the slow, terrible grandeur of something that had never needed to hurry. Its hull caught Lothal's reflected light and returned it as gray authority. The escort frigates, Batman noted, immediately adjusted their formation, not in response to a threat, but in deference. The automatic adjustment of vessels that had just been outranked by several magnitudes. A communication opened on the transport's bridge frequency. Not to them specifically, a broad hail to the entire formation. Vader's voice, carrying even through comm compression, filled the transport's cockpit with the weight of something geological. The anomaly is in this sector. All vessels hold position. Nothing leaves orbit. Breck looked at Batman. Batman looked at the Star Destroyer. The third contingency. The one he'd made no plan for, because some variables declined to be planned around. His comm crackled. Davin again, and this time her voice had lost its operational flatness. He's here. We can see the destroyer from the surface. What do we? Maintain silence, Batman said. Complete comm blackout. Do not transmit anything. Not a signal, not a breath. He cut the channel. He looked at the Chimera for a long moment. 43 failure points in the sector's administrative architecture. The archive data that could give the rebellion a structural map of Imperial control across this entire region. Kira in the canyon system. 17 people in a hillside settlement holding their breath. All of it balanced against one conversation he told himself he could control. He looked at Breck. Can you reach the planet's surface without that destroyer tracking us? Breck studied the sensor display with the eyes of someone running calculations built from decades of military experience. If we drop below the atmosphere inside the escort formation sensor shadow, the frigate blind spot at 200 meters off the port hull, and go dark immediately after. He was quiet for a moment. Maybe isn't good enough. In my experience, Breck said, maybe is usually what you get. Batman looked at the Star Destroyer again. Vader was on that ship, and Vader's attention was currently expanding outward through the Force, across the entire sector, looking for the specific absence that Batman represented. He had minutes before that search became a targeting solution. He thought about the psychological profile in the archive, what Vader was, what he'd been, the specific resonance between a man who had lost everything to darkness and decided to become it, and a man who had lost everything to darkness and decided to fight it. He thought about leverage that wasn't tactical, about the kind of conversation that could only happen between people who recognized something in each other that they'd rather not name. He thought about 17 people in a hillside settlement, and a 16-year-old who ran communications, and an old soldier who had fought beside the Republic before the Republic became this. Take us down, Batman said, inside the frigate's sensor shadow. Go dark at the atmosphere. Breck's hands moved on the controls without hesitation. And if the maybe doesn't work out, Batman was already moving toward the equipment bay, checking the grapple, checking the batarangs, checking the 4 remaining EMP charges, and thinking about how to use them against a target that didn't have electronics in the conventional sense. Then we find out what Darth Vader does, he said, when the thing he's curious about is cooperating. The transport banked hard into the frigate's sensor shadow, and Lothal's bruised atmosphere rose up to meet them like something that had been waiting, and above them the Chimera held its terrible position in the dark between stars, patient as the Empire itself. Somewhere below, in a canyon system carved from rock that confused the Force, a Jedi was leading a predator in circles. Somewhere below, in a hillside settlement holding its breath, 17 people were waiting for a signal. And somewhere in the dark of the Chimera's bridge, Darth Vader stood at the viewport and looked at the planet below with the full weight of everything he'd become and everything he'd buried, searching for a shadow that cast no reflection, finding instead a silence that felt, against all logic and all the dark architecture of who he now was, uncomfortably familiar. The transport hit the atmosphere. The bruise-colored sky opened up and swallowed them whole. They landed in the southern canyon. Batman had chosen it before the transport broke atmosphere. The geological interference that disrupted force sense tracking made it the only location on the planet where a conversation with Darth Vader could happen on terms that weren't entirely Vader's. Kira had described the canyon's properties during their walk, and he'd filed it then as a potential asset. He'd been right to file it. Breck set the transport down on a flat shelf of rock deep in the third tributary, killed the power systems completely, and sat in the sudden silence with the particular stillness of someone who had survived enough impossible situations to know that surviving one more required patience above all else. Batman left him there and moved into the canyon on foot, following the tributary north until he found Kira. She was crouched at the canyon's edge, looking down into the deeper channel below, and the fifth brother was nowhere visible. She heard Batman approach. He'd let her hear him, a courtesy, and stood without turning. "He lost me in the second tributary," she said. "The geological interference hit him harder than I expected. He's been moving in circles for 40 minutes. She paused. "He's angry. I can feel it even through the rock." "Good." Anger narrowed focus. Narrowed focus created predictability. "The destroyer. I know. I felt Vader the moment he dropped out of hyperspace." She turned then, and her face in the canyon's deep shadow carried something complicated. The specific expression of someone processing fear that had been abstract for a long time suddenly becoming geometrically concrete. "He's looking for you. He'll find me." Batman looked at the canyon walls. The rock was dark, striated in horizontal bands that spoke of ancient geological violence, the layers of a world that had built itself over millions of years by enduring pressure. "Here, on my schedule, not his." Kira looked at him for a long moment. "What are you going to say to him?" He'd been building the answer to that question since the archive. "The truth," he said, "specifically the parts of it that are most useful." Vader arrived 40 minutes later. He didn't come by shuttle. He came alone, descending through the canyon's upper atmosphere in a personal craft that Batman's optical suite identified as a modified Imperial shuttle, landing on the same flat shelf where Breck had set down the transport. Breck had moved the transport 300 meters north on Batman's instruction, deep enough into the canyon that the geological interference would mask it entirely. Kira had gone with him. This conversation had one participant on Batman's side. Batman stood at the canyon's center point and waited. Vader walked into the canyon with the absolute unhurried authority of someone who had never once in their life needed to announce themselves. The canyon walls threw his footsteps back in doubled echoes, that specific rhythm of mechanical breathing accompanying each step, a sound that Batman had heard in the archive's audio files. And that was, in person, considerably more affecting than documentation suggested. Not because it was frightening, though it was. Because it was the sound of someone kept alive by technology applied to catastrophic damage. And Batman had spent enough time with pain to recognize its signature in others. He stopped 15 meters away, in the canyon's shadow, with the geological interference pressing against the force from every direction. He looked slightly diminished, not physically, not in presence, but in the specific way that a sense organ removed from its medium loses some of its information. He was reading the canyon and finding static. He looked at Batman for a long moment. "You are not force sensitive," he said. His voice in person carried harmonics that no recording captured. Something resonant and layered, two voices occupying the same frequency. "No," Batman said. "You are not from this galaxy." "No." Vader was quiet. The breathing continued its rhythm. Inhale. Mechanical exhale. Inhale. While he looked at Batman with whatever combination of senses remained available to him inside the canyon's interference. "Yet the Force cannot read you. Not absence. I have felt absence before. This is different. You are present and unreadable, like a mind that has been made into a wall." "That's accurate," Batman said. "It took 20 years. Another silence, longer. Vader's helmet turned slightly. The specific tilt Batman had seen through the ventilation gap in the data fortress. The posture of someone receiving information from an interior source. Getting less here than he expected. Adjusting. "You infiltrated an Imperial facility," Vader said. "You evaded the fifth brother. You disrupted a supply operation in my sector." His voice carried no heat. It was the flat, analytical tone of someone cataloging rather than accusing. You have been in this galaxy for less than 3 days, 57 hours. And in 57 hours you have caused disruption that most rebel operations require months to achieve. He paused. Without killing anyone. That's a line I don't cross. In this galaxy, Vader said, that line is a luxury. In every galaxy, Batman said, it's a choice. The difference between a line and a luxury is whether you're willing to pay the cost of keeping it. He held Vader's gaze, or the approximation of it that the helmet allowed. You know something about the cost of choices. The canyon was very quiet. Somewhere above them, the geological strata pressed their ancient weight against the Force, and the Force pressed back. And in the space between those pressures, 2 men stood with the specific stillness of people who had recognized something they hadn't expected to recognize. You read my file, Vader said. It wasn't a question. Yes, then you know what I am. I know what you became, Batman said. I know what you were before. I know the specific shape of the thing that happened in between. He paused. I know it because I've stood at the same edge. I chose differently. The breathing continued, unchanged in rhythm, which told Batman nothing about what was happening behind it. Vader was a man who had learned to keep everything behind walls of his own construction. Different walls than Batman's, built from different materials, serving a different architect. But walls. You came here to negotiate, Vader said. I came here because you were going to find me regardless, and I preferred to choose the location. And the terms. 1, Batman said, the cell on the northern hillside. 17 people who have never appeared in any Imperial intelligence file, directly connected to significant rebel operations. They're not worth your attention, not strategically, not politically. They're too small. He paused. Leave them. Vader looked at him. In exchange for what? Information. Batman reached into his utility belt and removed the signal analyzer, the device that had spent 57 hours absorbing everything the galaxy had thrown at it. Everything I've observed since I arrived. Imperial security vulnerabilities, patrol patterns, administrative failure points, communication gaps. 57 hours of intelligence gathered by someone your systems couldn't track. He held it out. More useful than 17 rebels who've never done anything your sector command would file above routine. The silence stretched. You would give me this, Vader said, for 17 people. For the principle that some things aren't worth destroying. Batman kept his voice level. You understand principles. You've paid enough for them. It was the most dangerous thing he'd said. He knew it when he said it. The canyon held its breath around them, rock and ancient pressure and geological interference, and Vader stood in it without moving for a duration that Batman counted in heartbeats. Then Vader reached out and took the analyzer. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Batman. The 5th brother will need to be redirected. His psychological profile suggests a reassignment to a sector with active Jedi presence would satisfy his operational requirements completely. Batman paused. There's a lead in the outer rim. The archive mentioned an unconfirmed Force signature near Malachor, authentic enough to chase for months. Something moved through Vader's posture that wasn't quite anything Batman could name. Not satisfaction, not amusement. Something older and more complicated than either. You planned this conversation, Vader said. I planned for multiple versions of it. And if I had chosen differently, Batman looked at him steadily. Then we'd be having a different conversation. This one seemed more productive. Vader looked at the analyzer once more. Then he turned and walked back through the canyon without another word, his footsteps doubling in the rock walls, the mechanical breathing fading by degrees until the canyon held only its own geological silence. Batman stood in the empty space. Vader had occupied and breathed carefully around his ribs and looked at the canyon walls and thought about the specific weight of a gamble that had paid out in the only currency that mattered. Everyone's still alive. Kivra appeared from the northern tributary. She looked at the empty canyon, then at Batman. He's gone, she said. Not a question. He's gone. She was quiet for a moment. What did you give him? 57 hours of intelligence that will be outdated in a week. He began walking toward where Breck had taken the transport. The archive data I copied separately. The failure points are intact. Kira fell into step beside him. After a moment, and the cell, safe, for now. He looked at the canyon walls as they walked. The striated rock, the ancient pressure made visible. Now is what we have. Tomorrow is a different problem. Above them, through the canyon's narrow opening to the sky, the Chimera was already moving, its Star Destroyer silhouette crossing the stars in the direction of the outer rim, following a lead about a force signature near Malachor that would occupy the Fifth Brother's considerable predatory energy for a substantial portion of the future. The stars burned cold and unnamed. Batman walked through the canyon that had confused the Force, with 2 cracked ribs and a salvaged grapple housing and an archive full of 43 ways to begin dismantling an empire. And thought about a city he'd left mid-grapple in the rain, and whether the rain was still falling, and whether it mattered. It mattered. It always mattered. But the rift hadn't reopened. And there was work here that looked, from where he was standing, uncomfortably, like work that needed doing. He filed the city. He filed the rain. He kept walking.